If I move forward, my nose glows. Hello, curios and curiosities. Today is January 4th, which would have been my brother's birthday. He would have been 34 today. So it seemed kind of very apropos to use today to sort of talk through my feelings and some of the story elements of Edith Finch. What Remains of Edith Finch is, of course, a beautiful video game that I got to play and streamed a little while back. You can watch the full playthrough with minor silencing during a particular spot because apparently the game developers got rights to the music Halloween, which obviously is super copyrighted. So I knew going in that this game was going to probably destroy me on a few levels. When you start out, you get a look at Edith Finch's notebook, and she has drawn her family tree. And everybody, with the exception of her, has a death date. So straight off the bat, you know that Edith Finch is the only surviving Finch. You find out that Edith has gone back to her old house, which she hasn't been in, it sounds like about 6 years, so that she can sort of get some answers about her family. The family supposedly has this curse upon it. You don't hear about its origins, what really started this idea that they were cursed. And as you go through, you kind of start to question back and forth of like, is the family cursed, or have they sort of created their own self-fulfilling prophecy? And as you go through, you see how each family member passed away. Personally, I don't believe that the Finch family is cursed. I believe it very much is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and really they're just the result of a series of unfortunate events, somewhat that just happened because bad things sometimes happen, and then some that were definitely fueled by the fact that they fed into this idea of a curse, and it sort of haunted them a little bit, like in the case of Walter, who, after experiencing something incredibly traumatic, obviously, with his sister being mysteriously murdered and her murderer never being found, he went down and hid from society for freaking years and years, and so much that he thought there was a monster outside of his door. There wasn't a monster outside of his door, there was a train overhead, which is eventually what hits and kills him when he decides to forsake his hiding place, and he goes out a certain way that leads him right onto the tracks. And I'm not sure the logic behind him not hearing it. Maybe it's a matter of he had just convinced himself that that sound was the monster, and so he didn't really register that that's a train and couldn't get off the tracks in time. And you also have Molly, who is the small girl who has these insane visions of becoming various animals and eating things, including a monster with tentacles that kills sailors. Since she's eating so many weird things, one of them might have caused hallucinations. I thought initially it might have been the holly, and it is holly, not mistletoe. Mistletoe has white berries. But holly, for the most part, it's toxic, don't get me wrong. The berries are very toxic, but it still takes upwards of 20 of them for a person to be in danger of dying, and they're not quite so tasty for, like, we see her have like maybe like 3 or 4, but she is also a small child. Most cases with hollyberry poisoning actually apparently are children. So it's possible, but nothing I found really supported the idea that it would give hallucinations or anything like that. But it may also be that sticking so much to facts wasn't too much on that particular story's mind. I don't know. We also have to go by Molly's word that that's all she ate. It's possible she found other things when she was grabbing for stuff. For all we know, if it was actual holly, like a plant, it might have actually had some sort of pesticide on it as well. So there's a lot of factors we don't have, but the more I think about Molly's story and look back on it, the more I am fairly convinced that Molly's story boils down to hallucinations driven by a fantastic imagination and some poisoning, which unfortunately resulted in her not living through till the morning. Those of you who know my history probably either saw if you watched the playthrough or know that it was going to be hard for me to go through Lewis's storyline. And It definitely was, but I kind of knew it was coming. If you have that many deaths on a family tree and you're going to find out about all of them and everyone seems different in some way, it's pretty much guaranteed that one of them is going to be by self-harm. Given that Lewis passed away in his early 20s, I think he was 22, I kind of figured it would be him. And the moment I picked up the letter from the psychiatrist, it was like, well, yeah, it's definitely going to be Lewis. So I had prepped myself. And while the self-harm is jarring, I mean, as it very much should be, like any idea of suicide or surrounding that should be jarring and upsetting. But I was extremely impressed with how they handled his death. They really took the time to show you why this method came about. I mean, they could have written it off very willy-nilly. I see very constantly in storytelling with people who don't understand mental illness, just sort of write it off of like, oh, they're crazy, or oh, they were depressed and that's why. And this is the method they went about because blah, because it's dramatic or whatnot. But the writers of What Remains of Edith Finch did not do that for Lewis. They immersed you full-heartedly into his mindset, and with the gameplay, even if your mouse going back and forth cutting the fish, and I was certain it was going to cut his hand off, like I was waiting for it, but they had you doing it so many times that eventually, and nothing happened, that you just got used to it, and you're like, okay, I guess my hand's going to be fine. It'll be fine. And with your left hand or the keyboard directing around his imagination as he wandered around this land that got more and more detailed as you went from just lines to very rudimentary 3D animation to more depth, more characters, more movement, and as the screen began to expand across your play space, you can't even really see your hands as you move the fish across. And you have to keep moving the fish because if you don't, it covers up your other part. So you're stuck and you get so used to it. It's very like this sort of motion, the rub stomach, pat head, where you just get so used to it as you go through. And it's really this whole story that really gave me perspective on the rest of it, the more I thought about it. But you get very immersed in Lewis's thought process of the monotony of this and how, like, because you do start forgetting that you're doing this. You just keep doing it because it's that repetitive that you don't need to be there present for that, to keep controlling your little guy through the imagination. And it's the more interesting game of the two, and they sort of shift you so you are going through his mindset of this was the better life, and then when you find out how he ends it, it is not in a way where he seemed even aware of what he was doing, which, while that's not everybody's story. Obviously, my brother's story in regards to suicide is a very different one. But I have so much respect and love for this part of the story because so many people who don't understand why suicide happens think it's like, oh, well, it's a selfish action, or, you know, it's done to hurt people, and it's not that at all. I'm sure there's like a very small percentage of people who do like the suicide revenge fantasy for real or whatnot, which is unfortunately it is actually a thing. It's usually more used for threats and manipulation than someone actually following through with it. But for Lewis, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is like me taking the next step so I can actually like fully be immersed in this world that I have created, where I've accomplished so much, where I'm so proud of what I've done. And it was just beautiful and heartbreaking, despite the fact that I felt like through his psychiatrist and through my own personal insight, I understood why Lewis's death happened the most. I still had so many questions, and coming away from this game, I just had a pile of questions that I wanted to know, and then I realized maybe that's probably the point. Death leaves you with so many questions. This is also something I tried to emulate forever ago when I first wrote Funeral Potatoes, which was this idea of just, you will be left wanting, and that's how it should be. You should not feel satisfied after a game like this, because it's dealing with the concept of mourning and how you will not have those questions answered. I still have questions about Joel's death, even really mundane ones that I know will never be answered, and even if they are, I will have more because of it. One of which, he had this laptop that he'd been given, I think for his birthday or Christmas, and we never found it. Never. And none of his friends talked about it or what happened to it, and it's just one of those things of what happened to that laptop, like. And I think part of that question isn't just what happened to it. Part of it is, does that laptop contain information that would help me feel more satisfied or less confused about his death? And the answer, of course, is no. Nothing on there would ever make that feeling of dissatisfaction go away. Well, why did this happen? And could this have been prevented? And that feeling, I feel like, is embodied so well by this game. Of, it's not survivor's guilt per se, it's embodying survivor confusion, or I don't even know if that's a term, but I cannot recommend this game enough. It will be hard. I definitely would not have told Kiri straight out, like even a year after Joel's death, to play this, because I think it would have destroyed her. But 6 years after, I feel like I have a better understanding. And it still hurts, of course it still hurts, it's always gonna hurt. But this is honestly, stories like this are exactly why I write. Being able to give your audience that truly immersive experience of, this is what it's like to go through something like that, to be in those shoes. And for me, What Remains of Edith Finch is what it's like to be the survivor. If you have not played Edith Finch, I cannot recommend it enough. If you saw me play part of it, you know the spoilers or whatnot. Obviously, this talkback was full of quite a few of them. I imagine this game seems very in direct contrast with the idea of seeking joy. You can't find it unless you look for peace within yourself and sort out all that stuff. And for me, What Remains of Edith Finch was very much you've got to do some resorting with your emotional baggage. You have to, if you're gonna ever like make it something manageable, you have to take it out of the box every now and then, look at it, really confront what's still there about it. And you have to kind of do it pretty regularly. And that ends our talkback, or my general thoughts for now about the game What Remains of Edith Finch. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share with all of your lovely friends. Good fortune to you joy hunters, and most importantly, stay curious.